So back here on our Eagle page, we want creating blocks of content. That's where we're going to first start by looking at how we accomplish essentially what we saw here at The Verge. So in really, really broad strokes, what we're seeing here is as follows. We're seeing a rectangle box and a square box. And on the next line, we're seeing a square box and a rectangle box. That is all. So that is what we are seeing here at the top of The Verge's page. Two boxes side by side, one on the left, one on the right. On the next line, we're seeing two boxes side by side, one on the left, one on the right, but it happens to be in the reverse order. And this is what we want to accomplish, and this is something we can accomplish with HTML and CSS. So I'm going to come over here and look at our creating blocks of content HTML page. And again, I just click through from our link on the Eagle HTML page, and right over here, you can see roughly something similar to what we saw on The Verge's page. We have two blocks of content next to each other, 1 and 2. So this is block 1, this is block 2, this is block 3, this is block 4. We'll see how everything is done here in just a moment. So each one of these, block 1, block 2, block 3, block 4, is going to be represented as a class. So if we click on style.css, you'll see I just grabbed from our previous example, I just grabbed the two imported Google fonts so that we could use them so that these look a little bit better. I just grabbed them and pasted them in here. We'll worry about that again next time when we look at creating a similar but different example from the ground up. So here I have block 1. You can tell that block 1 is a class because of the dot nomenclature. So dot block 1 means that I can use a block 1 container as many times as I want in my HTML page, and that's going to be okay. So for each one of these, I have a width. So here, we'll just focus on block 1 and then we'll work our way down. So I just picked a percent. These percents are of it's called your viewport. That's over here on the right-hand side. All of this top right-hand side window is the viewport. So what I'm going to do is just change the size of this to 25, and I'll run it again. And what you can see is that block got a lot more narrow because its width is a lot more narrow. So I'm going to change this again back to 45, and we'll run it, and you can see it is unchanged from the original version that we saw. I have a background color. This isn't anything new. We've already added background colors to stuff. This time, instead of adding a background color to a block of text, we're adding a background color to a container that I'm going to define here with lines 4 through 15. Now, actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut height from here, and I'll add it right after width. Now, this is a little unfair. It's taken me a little while to develop a calibrated eyeball to let you know that we want a height associated with our containers. You really do, in all of your container classes, need a height and a width. For the most part, and for our experience here, we're going to be using a percent for our width. So 80%, 70%, 50%, 10%, something like that. And for our height, you're going to have an experience where you calibrate your eyeball to it. Is it going to be 500 pixels? Is it going to be 300 pixels? You're going to have to guess and get it to look the way you want. But for this particular exercise, all of these containers are going to be 300 pixels tall. Just like here, this container, though it's a rectangle, is the same height as this container, though it's a square. So there's my height. We've already talked about background color. Color, again, is the foreground color, the text color. And I want that in white because this is a black box, and otherwise black box with black text means you can't read the text. Font size, this is a new way for us to be able to size them, or a different way for us to be able to size it like we've seen before. An EM just is whatever your standard font is, the number is, in this case, 2 means multiply it by 2, so make it twice as big. If I made a 0.5 EM, that means it's half the size. We could have also said 200%, and if I run it, you'll notice that font didn't change at all. I can say 300%, and I run it, and you'll notice that font size got a lot bigger. So I will leave the percent here. I actually think that's the better one to use. But you can, assemble it from there. We'll talk about this float idea. You'll notice that these both elements are next to one another, right? So there's 1, there's 2, and till here, every time we've added a new element to a page, it goes on the next line underneath. And what that's called is document flow. Just like in Word, when you add an image, it just goes whomp, and it gets inserted essentially in between paragraphs. That doesn't look great. That's not what we're looking at here when we're looking at good design. So the idea of float is this is one of those instances where it's doing exactly what the English word is trying to tell us. It's going to float one of them. So we can have a float left and a float right, and instead of having two elements on top of one another, they can occupy the similar, the similar vertical space, but they'll have different horizontal display in there. So I have float left, and for block 2, you guessed it, I'm going to have a float right. So one is on the left-hand side, one is on the right-hand side. The other things, I've got padding top and padding left. Do you see this nice little space right here? The essentially the indentions, the margins, right? To the left and to the top of this is block 1. If I was to comment out those both lines, this is how that looks. And personally, I think this is not good. I think it's a little gross. I don't like the way that looks. So I'm going to comment these back in. So again, that's Command or Control /, and we're going to run it. And it makes that nice, separation between the edges of your container and where the content is. That looks nice. You can change this in any way, shape, or form you would like. So padding left is how far over from the left it is. I'm going to say 50 pixels, and you can see that gets pushed more into the center. I could say padding top and say 100 pixels, and what you'll see is that's being pushed down from the top of your container. One thing to note here, you'll notice that screwed up my container sizes because now my block 1 is a different height than everybody else is. So I'm going to put these back at 30 and 30 because everything else in here is taking that same size. That's what I want it to do. So that is block 1. Block 2 is this over here. The big differences here are the font family is different. So block 1 has a Roboto font family. Block 2 has a Lobster font family. Now, again, we're going to do another example of this where we type everything from the very top, but I just want to show you how this is going to look in the HTML. If we come back to our HTML, we'll talk about the separator in a second. Here's div. So it's lines 12 through 14. My div class equals block 1, just like we did in our previous 2 examples. We declared a class. We have an opening div for it and a closing div for it. This right here, this is block 1. That's the content we have inside of it. That's the exact same thing we did here for block 2. We opened a div for our class, block 2. We closed the div for our class, block 2, and we added our content in there. This is block 2, and that all creates this blue block that we have on our right hand side. So before we look at containers, 3, and 4. It's worth mentioning that I do have this extra container class called separator. If you think about stacking dishes in a cupboard or stacking like Tupperware inside of one another, so instead of having 1,000 individual pieces of Tupperware, you have one nice stack where the little ones, the medium ones, and the big ones all fit down inside one another and they barely take up any space at all. That's what we're doing here with this separator class. If I was to remove it, so I can remove it on line 11, I'm going to comment that out, and on line 27, I'm going to comment that out. And if I run it, you'll notice they touch, that my boxes touch over here. And the whole idea here in including the separator is just the same thing like I was putting Tupperware inside of one another. If I wanted to separate them so that, or glassware inside of one another so that one plate doesn't scrape up on another one, you put something like a paper towel in between them. That's what we're doing here. We're making sure that one container doesn't butt right up against the other one, and we do that by just making a small separate container. So I'm going to run one more time. We're going to see that nice separation down here. So I do also have a block 3 and a block 4, and they are identical in how they look here in my CSS to the way that block 2 and block 1 did. If we go look at our style.css, you'll notice there's actually, all I did was I copied block 2 and I pasted it into block 3 because the upper left and the lower right hand side one look the same. And then I took my block 1 and I pasted it into block 4 because my upper left and my lower right boxes look the same. The only difference between them is I wanted to more closely recreate what's happening here with a rectangle box and a square box. So what I did was I changed block 3 to 60% wide, and block 4 I changed to 30. So instead of 45, I made these 60 and 30. It's still taking up the same. If you add up those numbers, you'll notice they both equal 90, and they're both taking up 90% of the width of that window over there on the right. If I wanted this to look a lot more close to the way the Verge page looks, I'm going to take block 3 and I'm going to make that 70. I'm going to take block 4 and I'm going to make that 25%. Block 2, so that one is my it's going to be my square box. Instead of 45%, I'm going to make this 25, and block 1, instead of 45%, I'm going to make this just like my block 3 is 70. And when I run this, everything went terribly wrong. I've added incorrectly somewhere. Oh, because there's that. Okay, we'll change that to 65. I have those paddings and margins in there. I forgot to account for those. So I wanted to take up 90% of the width, and I knew that going in, and then I forgot again. So this more closely resembles, and we can make these just a little bit wider, I think 28. If we wanted it to, that space in between, there we go. Now again, I knew that because I looked at that with my calibrated eyeball. I've been doing this for 20 years. I could tell that 3% was all the difference in the world. In no way, shape, or form would I expect that it's reasonable for a student now to just be able to look at that and get that number right. You'll have to fiddle with it, but it's okay because look how quickly we've made all of those changes. It's just boom, 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 and we can make a really big impact on the way a page looks. And again, that's the best part of HTML and CSS. Now, very finally, I got these reversed. Block 1, block 3, block 2, I got these numbers reversed. So this one, I'm going to make 28. This one, block 4, I'm going to make 65. And this time around, there we go. That looks much more closely to how this page on The Verge looks. And we did it all with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 classes, and less than 60 lines of code in CSS and HTML. That's how remarkably quick this goes. So in our next example, you're going to type along with me, and we're going to create another page, a different looking page that uses classes and IDs in HTML and CSS to make a modern looking web page.